Welcome to episode 114 of the Clarity Compressed podcast. My name is Paul J. Daly. Today, we're talking about never going back to the way it was. We're making our way through the fog of life, and clarity is understanding where we are on the map. You are here.
Let the good times roll.
This is Clarity Compressed. Today's moment of clarity is this. There is always a valley between the mountaintops, between the hills. It's easy to have things like this pandemic is a great example. We were doing great as a country, economy was booming, and we're on our way to other good times as a country. But before we get there, we have to go through the dip. We have to go through the hard times and the struggles before we can enjoy the view. On the other side, a little perspective for you. History has always done it. Life always does it. And there's always a valley between the hills. So we're on our way through. That's okay. That's okay. That's the moment of clarity for today.
I'm so excited for what he's gonna show me. Hurry up and show me Paul's pick.
Okay, Paul's pick for this week is Beacon Skiff's hand sanitizer. Now, if you're not from the Syracuse area, Beacon Skiff is actually an apple orchard, and they make apple cider, and they have a beautiful property, and they also make distilled spirits and vodkas, things like that. And they reinvented and retooled to make it's not apple antiseptic. It's actually hand sanitizer that they made, and they bottled it. And so my pick this week are companies that are willing to reinvent to provide a product or service that is completely relevant to the situation we're going through. So kudos to every company doing that. And here's one little example: Beacon Skiff hand sanitizer. So I was doing a lot of holding on in the early days of this pandemic. And when I say holding on, I mean holding on to hope. Holding on to the thought that it was going to blow over, holding on to the optimism that it was just going to be a short season where we kind of just get a little blip and we get through it, and then we keep going, and holding on to the optimistic hope that it wasn't really going to change much, and that pretty soon all of the weirdness and all of the talk about pandemic and people getting sick and maybe things even getting closed or maybe being inconvenienced for a little bit would eventually get back to normal, or get back to normal quickly. And about 2 weeks ago, so right now it's mid-April, and about 2 weeks ago, it began to sink in that we're never going back. It's not going to happen that way. We're not going to get back to normal fast. That it's going to be a while before we even know how much effect this is actually going to have on just about every area of our life. Every area. And as that began to sink in, the fact that we're never going back, as that began to roll around in my mind and I began to absorb it past my natural optimistic self that everything's just going to be fine and minimizing it and it's all going away, I realized that for many of us, that going back, it's actually going to be far better for us if we never do go back to the way it was. Because as it settles in and you think about it, there's a lot more that might just be better off changed, better off reimagined, and better off reinvented than if it was restored back to the way it was. And that's kind of a hard reality to sink in the beginning, because we as humans, we naturally are wired to defend against change, because change means uncertainty, change means danger, change means disrupting the equilibrium of our lives. And even though there are a lot of things in our lives that may be unhealthy, may be unhelpful, may be wasteful, there's still something very comfortable about routine and very comfortable about the way they are now. And maybe they won't be better if it changes. So again, in the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, my optimism was like, oh, it's going to blow through. It'll be fast. And then about 2 weeks ago, it started to sink in that we're never going back. it's never going to be the way it was in so many ways. And we don't even really understand that yet. We don't even know when this kind of like quarantine and sequester is going to end. It's different in every area of the country. But as I got to that, I realized there are actually a lot of things that are going to be better reinvented. They're going to be better off reimagined than they would be than if they were just restored back to the way we were. And so I just want to talk about this and talk through this for a second and how it comes into context of the way I'm thinking about it in terms of really once in a lifetime opportunities. And, prior to this, 4 weeks ago, I never would have thought of like a once in a lifetime opportunity. I would think about things like that in terms of like meeting somebody very unique or going somewhere special or, having a situation that was like very favorable. But really, I think that we have more once in a lifetime opportunities that are starting to stack up as a result of this pandemic. And it'd be very, very easy to blow by those or sit in a hole and kind of mourn the loss of what it was instead of thinking about like all the things that are actually starting to stack up that would be better off reinvented about ourselves and our companies, organizations than they would be restored. In my line of work, I've been able to meet a lot of people all over the country. And so over the past weeks, I've been in countless conference calls and phone conversations with owners and CEOs and leaders and, everywhere from very small business owners and sole proprietors all the way up to the CEOs of publicly traded companies and leaders of billion-dollar organizations. I've been able to have conversations about this situation, this pandemic, with such a variety on the leadership chain. And all these people, they all have families too. So it's not only like the business conversations, but it's also like the family conversations, which, there's a lot of similarities in those conversations. And there's a theme that's been really coming to the surface in conversations at all of those different levels. And here it is. That there will never be a better opportunity to reinvent. There'll never be a better opportunity than right now to restart, to set things off on the right path. Now, sure, we can sit around and complain and we can mourn about all the things that were and about all the bad things that have come with this pandemic, all the unfavorable situations. But we can't control any of those things. Or I would say we can't control most of those things. And so we can sit around and like complain and mourn and talk about remember when. We can do that. Or we can decide to focus on the things we can control and that we can change for the better. And the opportunities to reinvent into something that is better reinvented than it would be to be restored back to where they were. So that is what we're talking about this week on episode 114. That is what I'm thinking about. That is what I'm living, both in my business life and in my personal life. And I hope by sharing some of those things and principles that I'm doing through, like, you might be able to get a little clarity for yourself and be able to walk through this with me, walk through this pandemic with me. 2 weeks, 2 weeks into the pandemic, I was still like, I think we're going to come through. I think it's just going to be a little blip and we'll get through. And then it sunk in 2 weeks into it that we're never going back. And you know what? That's okay. I hope you have a great week. I hope your family is healthy and well. As always, thank you for joining in with us here. And if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, please connect on LinkedIn. I have a lot of great stuff coming up over the next week or two, a lot of live events. If not, Instagram, email list, DM me. I answer them all. Until then, God bless you. Stay healthy, be well, and pursue clarity.
Yeah. Yeah.